And we have Walt Ruff has joined us. Walt, how are you?
What's going on, guys? I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us. We promised that you may have some news for us. So, any developments over there at PNC Arena about who might be in net tonight against the highest scoring team in the NHL, as well as any update on Andrei Svechnikov?
Well, guys, I wish I did, but we're about 15 minutes early on the segment. Rod Brind'amour is talking around 4:45. Maybe I'll get down there in time, but I told them, hey, you're going to have to move forward without me. I got important radio business to attend to.
Well, we appreciate that. We will, when we get that update from Rod, we will pass it along to the listeners. We were just talking about our concerns and our confidences for the Carolina Hurricanes. What are some of yours? Obviously, tonight I mentioned Nathan MacKinnon and this high-powered Colorado offense. Is this a good test for whoever does end up in net tonight?
Definitely. I could see an argument legitimately to go with any of the three available options tonight in Pyotr Kochetkov, Spencer Martin, or Antti Raanta. Obviously, you know what you've got on the other side, right? You've got a lot of talent, a lot of skill, and they can find different ways to make you pay at the top of their lineup. So anybody who's going to be in there is going to have their hands full. The good news is that the Canes have three options, right? There was a stretch of time there in December and January, and no disrespect or discrediting to Yanni Peretz. Obviously, you didn't want to get him in there in a situation like this, and the Canes only had one available guy. So the fact that they have three is nice, and like you all, I'm very curious to see who they wind up going with.
Certainly the first game out of the All-Star break, maybe chalk it up to a little bit of rust. I know the Hurricanes started a little bit slow. When you look at the second half of the season, and let's just take the month between now and the trade deadline, March 8th. What do you need to see, or what do you think leadership of this team needs to see from the Hurricanes before that trade deadline?
Well, hopefully you can see them get back to the form that they were playing in just before the All-Star break, right? Because that was some of the best hockey that they've played all season, especially after a very uncharacteristic and atypical October through December. It looked like they were finally playing to their identity, the way that fans have become accustomed to seeing. Before they headed to the All-Star break, they had points in 18 out of 21 games. They're right atop the mix of the Metropolitan Division. So you were just hoping that train could keep rolling, and the break came at a little bit of an inopportune time. But, losing by one goal to the best team in the Western Conference on your first game out of the break is really not the end of the world. Tonight certainly has a little bit more weight to it because you don't want to stumble twice coming back from the break. So hopefully they can get their train back on the tracks this evening and look like this Carolina Hurricanes team that had really showed up for the bulk of January.
And you're closer to it than I am, but it feels like the fans this year at least have this sense of like the expectations are so much higher. Let me put it that way. So every 2-game losing streak or every slow start seems to carry a little bit more weight than maybe it would have 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Does it feel like there is a window on this team, and maybe that's why the expectations or the anxiety is so high?
I think there's some merit to that, certainly. I wouldn't say that there's a window per se, because when you look at the core of this group, Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Seth Jarvis, those guys are all 26 or younger, right? So there's plenty of time. And then you look at net, you've got Kochetkov, who should be the guy for years and years to come. But I do think that some of it builds off of 3 consecutive division championships. They've been in the mix now for a couple of years. And when your team is in the mix for that long and you have this open window to try and really push for a Stanley Cup, and, management, coaching staff, players, they're all very adamant in saying, listen, making the playoffs isn't our goal anymore. We want to win a Stanley Cup. It does add a little bit of pressure, and it does add some expectations for the fan base. And the fact of the matter is that this team has gotten very close the last 3 years, but there is still that hump to get to. We've seen them reach the conference finals in previous years under Rod Brind'amour, and now they not only have to find a way to get back there, but hopefully in order to achieve the ultimate prize, they're going to have to go even one step beyond that as well.
I saw you on Twitter today. You talked about Seth Jarvis probably playing his 200th NHL game tonight. And, you selected 13th. You say that he ranks 5th among players from that draft class with 118 points. Seems to me the kind of player, and you just mentioned a bunch of them, that Carolina's been terrific in the draft, terrific at finding the right pieces to continue to keep that window open.
Well, you read between the lines there perfectly, Brian, because that's exactly what I was getting at. A big credit there to Assistant General Manager Darren York, who runs the draft for the Hurricanes. I just thought that was an absolute home run of a pick, especially in a draft class where it's shaping out that some of the guys, and again, not to discredit them, they're all talented players, but look at who went number 1 overall, Alexis Lafreniere to the New York Rangers. He hasn't exactly lived up to the hype that many thought he would be with the number 1 overall pick. And for the Canes to get a guy down in the middle there, closer of the first round, to have someone performing as well as he has, and those 118 points are coming after his draft following year was still played between Chicago and Portland. So for the fact that he's performing as well as he has and become a staple in the lineup and continues to develop and evolve his game really goes to show exactly like you said, another feather in the cap. The organization has drafted really well in the last 5 or 6 years.
And I think that's if you're a Hurricanes fan, I know maybe you're frustrated that haven't been able to take that next step, but I think that's why you have optimism, right? That's why I would have optimism in the front office, in the organization. We've seen the investments that Tom Dundon has made. It just feels like the franchise has found its spot. It's developing players. It's drafting well. Some of the free agent acquisitions are starting to work out. You obviously have the right coach in place. The owner is doing things on the business side that are really setting the team up for success. It just feels like this is the good place. If we're talking about the Panthers or the Hornets, they're kind of in the bad place. But it feels like this professional franchise in North Carolina is in the good place.
Well, you nailed it there, exactly. And I'm very grateful that is the case, because fans sat through quite the drought before the Rod Brind'amour, Don Waddell, Tom Dundon era began. There were some lean years there without playoff runs. And now, like you said, everything just feels different. You've got the coach in place. I know that there have been some rumblings about him needing a new contract at the end of the season, and Don Waddell assured us last week that he's not going anywhere, so that's a good sign. Tom Dundon's obviously made his commitment in terms of the financial. Look at the 20-year lease agreement and the development coming around PNC. That feels like it's trending in the right direction. You've got a great front office upstairs, accompanying Don Waddell and Darren York, Eric Tolsky, some really brilliant people. The draft has been fantastic. Like you said, you go and take a guy a little bit off the radar with the first-round pick last year in Bradley Nadeau, and what does he do? He's one of the top 10 leading scorers in NCAA hockey right now as a freshman, which is pretty atypical. So you're absolutely right. It feels like things are in a good place. I know there's that salivating desire for the Stanley Cup, but you can't say that the Hurricanes aren't right there when it comes to being in that conversation.
One of the things we brought up, and Graham brought it up earlier, is this the best that Jordan Martinook has ever played in his career?
Well, it certainly shows that way on the stat sheet, right? And what better time than now to do it? I believe he's coming up on a contract year, and he plays a very important role for this team in the sense that, yes, most nights he's in the third or fourth line. He's done a great job during the last 2 or 3 years playing alongside Jordan Staal and Jesper Fast, and he's kind of Mr. Reliable, and Rod Brind'amour's not afraid to play him anywhere in the lineup. We saw him for the first 2 periods on Tuesday night playing on the first line with Sebastian Aho and Teuvo Teravainen, and he's kind of that Mr. Can-Do-It-All. And with him performing as well as he has right now, it's certainly nice to seeing him get rewarded. Finally, things are trending his way. He had a really strong January after what was a turbulent start to the season, and hopefully for both his sake and the team's sake, he can keep that up for the rest of the regular season and maybe even beyond that.
I'm assuming the Staal line is going to get the McKinnon line all night, or should we expect something else?
I think that's pretty safe to say. Anytime a superstar comes to PNC and their line gets called, I think they know they're going to be out there against Jordan Staal in the faceoff dot. And that's something that is a great point to bring up, because Rod Brind'amour always says Jordan and his group never get enough credit in that sense, right? I know that in recent years, analytics and defensive metrics have become more evident in what they hadn't been in the past, but there's just something to be said for the fact of these guys who come in. How many times in recent years in just divisional play alone have we seen Jordan Staal get the Sidney Crosby line, see him get the Alexander Ovechkin matchup when he was, scoring goals left and right. So it is nice to see those guys getting the attention, because it may not show up on the stat sheet, but anytime you're keeping guys of that caliber off the stat sheet, it certainly deserves some praise.
Well, and what do you expect tonight? I mean, do you expect a kind of a wide open game? Obviously, that's what Colorado would like to play, or can Carolina kind of dictate the pace and the tempo of the game?
Well, I am genuinely curious to see how it shakes out, because when these two teams met back at the start of the season, it was much more of how Colorado wanted to play. And in recent years, we've seen Rod Brind'amour kind of flex his muscles as a coach and home ice and really get his groups going the way that he wants the game to go, because he can dictate the matchups and who he can get out there against who. That matchup back during October was during a really rocky time of injuries for the team. I know that, just to give one example, Callahan Burke, a guy who his only game played with the Canes this season came because he had been with the Colorado Eagles out in the AHL. So that was a proximity call-up that goes to show just how banged up the Canes were at the time. So I think both teams, frankly, are in a much different place than they were for their first matchup this season. And now I'm really eager to see how it goes tonight with these two editions of the squads going head-to-head.
Well, Walt, thank you so much. We know you got a press conference to get to get us some more information about who might be between the pipes tonight.
Yeah, I certainly do. Thank you guys for having me. I always appreciate it, and looking forward to a good one tonight.